Tech cards are any cards that are used in decks to counter common matchups, while often being dead cards against others. They usually do one specific thing to mess up another deck's game plan. So in this list, we'll be going over the 10 best of these tech cards over the years. And at number 10, we have the Big Game Hunter. Big Game Hunter is a 4-mana 4/2 that destroys a minion with 7 or more attack when played. This tech card was meant to efficiently destroy big minions, and actually used to have decent stats for its cost. Originally, when this card was most played, the card was a 3-mana 4/2 and a very strong card. Back in the day, many classes had no good single target removal due to how few cards there were in the game. Druids especially had trouble dealing with big minions, since their best single target option they had was Starfire. And even in classes that already had good removal, like Mage, they were still more than happy to run a decent 3-mana card which had the ability to kill one of your opponent's major threats. Since the game was much slower, Ragnaros and Sylvanas were staple late-game cards that every deck ran. This tech card was so heavily played that it was abbreviated as BGH, and was played so much everybody knew what you were talking about if you mentioned it. Some decks tech so hard against the meta, they even started running Abusive Sergeant, which gave a minion +2 attack, just so they could buff Sylvanas to 7 attack and kill her with a BGH. It actually started to push out slow, big decks so much that every time a new card had 7 or more attack, the Hearthstone community would meme that it would never see play because it dies to BGH. And for how silly it was kind of true. Blizzard did eventually nerf BGH to cost 5 mana rather than 3, making this tech card much worse in aggro or combo decks that didn't often run minions that had 7 or more attack. And even at 4 mana as it is today, the meta has shifted to be so much faster and have much better removal cards that BGH has seen no recent competitive play. Even still, its early dominance in Hearthstone's history for such a long time deserves number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Spellbreaker. This 4-mana card is a neutral 4/3 that silences a minion when played. This was another very popular staple card in a lot of decks, and filled the niche as a good neutral silence minion. Even before a ton of minions started having good onboard effects, Spellbreaker was at least considered in every deck because of how flexible silence was. If you were an aggro deck, like Pirate Warrior, you could use silence to get rid of a minion's taunt, and attack your opponent directly. Or if you were mid-range or tempo deck, you could silence an enemy minion's buffs and kill their minions easily. And if you were a control deck, you can silence any minion that lost your opponent the most amount of value. Basically, silence had so many good targets for so many good decks, that Spellbreaker was usually played as a one-of just in case you really needed to silence an enemy minion. It, like many of the other tech cards in this list, also wasn't even that bad to play on curve since a 4-mana 4/3 was good enough in the early days to kill 2 small minions before dying. Some of the best targets for Spellbreaker were expensive taunt minions, since silencing it and going face was basically as good as killing it. Or if your minions were to be debuffed or frozen, you could silence your own minions to still attack with them. Of course, there have been better silence tech cards over the year, like the 2-mana Ironbeak Owl, or now Royal Librarian, but Spellbreaker saw so much play that Blizzard had to move it to the Hall of Fame, Hearthstone's first ban list, so that other decks could actually run taunts and buffs without worry of being silenced all the time. And at number 8, we have Bad Luck Albatross. This 3-mana 4/3 beast shuffles 2 1-mana 1/1 vanilla beasts into your opponent's deck when it dies. This tech card, rather uniquely, was played to counter Reno decks, which have been played ever since its release. For those who don't know, Reno Jackson is a 6-mana 4/6 minion that when played fully restores your hero, but only if every card in your deck is unique. That meant if Bad Luck Albatross were to die, the 2 albatrosses it would shuffle into your opponent's deck would actually ruin Reno's Battlecry condition. And over the years, there have been many cards that have the same condition as Reno, with the most notable ones being Zephyrus the Great and Kazakis. Reno decks have pretty much always been some of the best decks in Standard and Wild, so having a way to finally tech against these decks was a breath of fresh air. Albatross was especially good since these decks would hold the Reno-like cards until the perfect moment, only for them to become useless when Albatross died. This card saw play in any deck that could copy it multiple times, aggro decks that really wanted to counter Reno's full heal, and even other Reno decks that wanted to win the mirror matchup more often. And even against normal decks, being a 3-mana 4/3, forcing one of your opponent's natural age on cards to be a useless 1/1, was actually so good that it actually got nerfed to 4 mana. Albatross wasn't unbeatable though, even after its nerf was reverted. Since the condition on Reno and support cards is only if your deck has unique cards, all your opponent had to do was just draw one of the 2 Albatrosses to reactivate their cards. And with Reno decks already running a fair amount of card draw, and Hearthstone decks only being 30 cards, it was pretty easy to draw at least 1 Albatross within a couple of turns. And speaking of very specific hate cards, at number 7 we have Skulking Geist. This neutral 6 mana 4/6 destroys all 1 mana spells in both players' decks when you play it from your hand. This card, as you can probably tell, is a tech card meant to destroy any problematic 1 mana spells in your opponent's deck. When this card was first released, it was a very welcome card and saw immediate play. At the time, Blizzard had just given Druid some of the best cards of all time, and created a very overtuned and warping class. It was so bad, in fact, that nearly the entire standard ladder was just different versions of Druid which utilized the same staple of cards. The main issue was a combination of Ultimate Infestation, an extremely good late-game card, Spreading Plague, an extremely good anti-aggro card, Malfurion the Pestilent, an extremely good hero card, and access to the pre-nerfed Innervate, considered one of the best cards of all time. Druid, before its nerfs, was absolutely unstoppable, and Skulking Geist was the only tech card at the time which could even remotely slow down Druid. You see, most Druid decks relied on some sort of 1 mana spell to help them win the game, whether it was Mark of the Lotus or Jade Idol. By destroying part of the win conditions, it helped other classes to at least fight back before they got completely outvalued. Afterwards, it saw continual play in control decks as a counter, once again, to Jade Idol, since this card could shuffle copies of itself back into the deck and effectively prevent any Jade decks from taking fatigue. And what's funny is that even though destroying 1 mana spells is a very niche effect, a lot of powerful decks over the years have needed 1 mana spells as their win condition. Geist has also been used to counter Freeze Mage, Jade decks, Kingsbane Rogues, Galakron Shamans, and most recently, dominant Odd Questline Hunters. While it was originally printed to only counter Jade Idol, Skulking Geist deserves a spot on this list for its consistent use as a tech card to counter some of the most degenerate decks in the game. And at number 6 we have Eater of Secrets. This neutral 4 mana 2/4 destroys all of your opponent's secrets and gains +1/+1 for each one destroyed when played. This card was actually the first neutral minion that, as its name implies, is able to destroy all of your opponent's secrets when played. For those of you who don't know, secrets are kind of like Hearthstone's equivalent of counter cards, which can only trigger on your opponent's turn when they do certain things. Even now, there have been other cards that destroy your opponent's secrets, but they have only destroyed one of your opponent's secrets, or are class specific. When this card first came out, it was continuously memed of as awful and saw no play for a long time. After all, a 4 mana 2/4 was awful to play with no secrets, and only 3 classes had access to them at the time. But in Wild, pretty much every mage deck that could was playing the Secret Ice Block, one of the best independent cards of all time. This 3 mana secret lets you avoid fatal damage and makes you immune for that whole turn, effectively making you unkillable during that turn. It basically gives you an extra turn for 3 mana, and lets you not have to worry about your opponent's board or burst killing you. Ice Block made Mage one of the best combo and control classes, with variations of Reno and Quest Mage being competitive for years, which is an extremely long time for any deck to last in Wild. Later, Mage even started getting tons of secret support, which just created another very dominant meta deck, Secret Mage. And at the time, Eater of Secrets was a highly recommended tech card since it was able to devastate so many different Mage decks for a while. Against combo or Reno decks, you could play Eater of Secrets to destroy their Ice Block, catch your opponent by surprise, and push for lethal directly. Or against any type of Secret Mage, a single, well-timed Eater could destroy 15 mana worth of secrets and win you the game on the spot. And for how specific the effect is, being able to counter one of the best cards in the game and ruin your opponent's game plan has been so useful that Eater of Secrets deserves a spot on this list. And at number 5, we have Narubar Weblord. This 2 mana 1/4 simply makes all Battlecry minions cost 2 more mana. When Weblord came out in the first set of the game, almost everybody ignored it, mostly because it didn't have a premium stat line and often hurt you just as much as your opponent. But over the years, people have valued Weblord's aura effect more and more due to its ability to slow down your opponent's plays. You see, compared to the early days of Hearthstone, almost every good minion has to have an immediate effect on the board when they're played. Sometimes it's in the form of a taunt or a board effect, but a vast majority of the time, an immediate effects are in the form of battle cries. This is mostly because of the way keywords are written in Hearthstone, since if you want a minion's effect to trigger as soon as it's played, it has to be a battle cry. That means there are a ton of battle cry minions, all of which are heavily affected by Weblord. This card falls into the rare category of a Floodgate tech card, meaning it punishes certain cards by making them unable to be played. Of course, making Battlecry minions cost 2 more may not sound like a lot, but when most games are decided in the first 4 turns, every mana crystal matters. This can devastate Battlecry heavy minion decks if they have no hard removal, since it can lock them out of 2 full turns if left untouched. In the past, this card was used in Aggro Druid and Tax Paladin decks that didn't use a lot of Battlecry minions so they could lock out cards like Reno Jackson. which would heal their opponent to full health. Having such a universal condition may not sound like a tech card, but with how powerful some spell-heavy decks are, Weblord can be completely useless in those matchups. Slower decks have started realizing its power as a tech card though too, funnily enough. Lock out other tech cards or shut down battlecry heavy decks. Weblord might have had a slow start, but its continual and massive rise gives it a spot on this list. And at number 4, we have Galaka Crawler. This 2-mana 2/3 destroys a pirate when it's played. Galaka Crawler is probably what most people think of when a tech card comes to mind, and for good reason. Throughout the years, and ever since its release until rotation, Galaka Crawler has been a reliable way to keep pirates in check. Pirates have long since been a meta threat, but it all started with the release of Patches the Pirate. This 1/1 charge could pull itself from the deck for free whenever you played a pirate, and has been one of the main reasons why pirates has been relevant as long as they have. Patches is basically a free 1/1 that thins your deck, and has been so good that pretty much every aggro deck in the last 5 years has used it. And even with the chance to draw Patches, and its nerf to remove charge, some decks have created a pirate package just so they can abuse Patches. Needless to say, pirates have dominated in Wild and Standard since Patches' release, so it's no wonder that Blizzard actively had to print Galaka Crawler in an attempt to stop pirates from warping the meta so much. And its stat line as a 2-mana 2/3 is decent enough to see play in both aggro and control decks, even if it doesn't get any value eating a pirate. Whenever pirate decks become too common or too good, Galaka Crawler has been the staple tech card that many decks have used to try to slow down pirates, by destroying one of their minions and creating a 3/4 to contest the early game board. It's been so needed at times that some decks have had to run Galaka Crawler in a deck with pirates just so they could punish other pirate decks. And if it weren't for the other tech cards on this list, Galaka Crawler would probably be the best tech card in the game. And at number 3, we have Dirty Rat. Dirty Rat is a 2-mana 2/6 with Taunt that, when played, summons a random minion from your opponent's hand to the field. This card is one of the few hand disruption cards in Hearthstone, and has seen consistent play in most Control and Reno decks. You see, when Dirty Rat was first printed, its intended use as an overstated 2-drop was to contest whatever it pulled from your opponent's hand. But as a control deck, you really only wanted to play Dirty Rat when you knew you could remove whatever it pulled, making it effectively the first neutral discard effect that could selectively pull minions from your opponent's hand. Even counting using a hard removal effect, Dirty Rat is still effectively a -1 in card advantage, the same as just playing a normal card, while also messing with your opponent's game plan and setting up a fairly big 2/6. Most combo decks, the main decks Dirty Rat was teched for, almost always have to run specific minions to OTK you, like Mozaki, Mecha'thun, or Malygos. So being able to pull them from your opponent's hand and kill them could win you the game on the spot. And what really made Dirty Rat an insane tech card was how good it was against even aggro or other control decks. Most aggro decks run pretty small minions, so having a 2-mana 2/6, even if it pulled another minion, was usually enough to slow down aggro decks that it was pretty unpunishable turn 2 play. Or against control decks, a well-timed Dirty Rat could pull one of your opponent's win conditions or value cards, putting you massively ahead in terms of advantage. And for those reasons, Dirty Rat has consistently been among the most played cards in Wild. And the only real weakness of this card was how hard it was to use optimally, especially since you had to rely on luck and knowing enough about your opponent's deck to weigh the odds on when to play it. Even still, Dirty Rat has proven to be one of the best tech cards of all time, just like the next card on this list. And at number 2, we have Rust-Rot Viper. This card is a neutral 3-mana 3/4 that destroys your opponent's weapon when played. It's also tradable, meaning that you can choose to shuffle this card back into your deck and draw a new one for 1 mana. Rust-Rot Viper hasn't been out for long, or even in the best meta, and yet it has seen a ton of competitive success. Usually, what makes a good tech card is how game-winning it is against its targeted decks, and how playable it is against its suboptimal matchups. Viper fulfills both of these conditions well due to its amazing stat line and tradable mechanic. Nowadays, most decks that run weapons only bring a few good weapons to help them win, since running a ton of weapon gives diminishing returns. So, as a premium 3-mana 3/4, you can effectively destroy one of your opponent's very valuable weapons for free, gaining tempo and mana advantage. And what makes this card really great is that against decks that don't run any weapons, you can just trade it away for 1 mana and get a new card, instead of having it sit dead in your hand like all the other weapon tech cards. For reference, a lot of cards already value drawing a card at more than 1 mana. So being able to cycle Viper for 1 mana has been so good that some decks run it just for this effect. The only thing holding this card back from being higher is that historically, weapon decks were a lot stronger before Viper was printed, and have all but vanished except in questline Pirate Warrior. Even still, it was the most played card while it was in Standard for a while, with tons of success in Wild too. There's no doubt that if this card were to exist in a meta with more good weapons, it would absolutely become the tech card of choice. And at number 1, we have Lotheb. This neutral 5-mana legendary minion is a 5/5 that, when played, makes all your opponent's spells cost 5 more mana during their next turn. This card didn't see much play when it first came out, but like other tech cards in this list, has become more valued as the power level of the game has increased over the years. Lotheb came out in the first expansion of the game and was brushed aside since the game was more focused around minion combat, and just a few spells helped round out decks. Nowadays though, spells, despite being one-time use only, are just as powerful and played as their minion counterparts. They can summon minions, buff your minions, draw cards, push for lethal, or just be win conditions. To put another way, if a card were to be printed that made all of your opponent's minions cost 5 more mana during their next turn, it would absolutely be one of the best cards in the game, but it would still be worse than Lotheb. You see, as a tech card, Lotheb has so many good applications that most people wouldn't immediately think of Lotheb as one. Aggro decks play it as a finisher to protect their board from spell removal. Control decks use it to slow down other control decks, and all decks use it to shut combo decks out for one turn. Of course, as a tech card, it's useless against all minion decks or when your opponent doesn't have any spells they want to play that turn. But other than that, it effectively shuts out a half of all cards your opponent could play, most of which would either be removal or game-winning combo cards. And as a 5-mana 5/5, it's actually still good enough to be played as is, just to gain info on how many spells your opponent has in their hand. Lotheb, as a result, has been a wild staple as a generically good tech card for years, either as a tech finisher for aggro decks, or as a combo shutdown for control decks. Alright, and that's the list. Do you know of any other tech cards we might have missed that should have been in the video, or have ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about those down in the comments.